Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the AI Interconnect podcast. I'm your host, Laurent. On this show, I speak with founders, operators, and investors building real company and solving real problem across technology, finance, and infrastructure. AI Interconnect is a platform where entrepreneurs shares what is actually happening inside the company, what is working, what is difficult, what is coming next. Today, I'm joined by Marc Schillinger, co-founder and CEO of eCollect. And eCollect is a digital platform that helps company manage the full receivable process across Europe, from invoicing and reminders to collection and payments. Marc, thanks for being here. Very happy to have you on the show.
Laurent, it's a pleasure to be there. Thanks a lot for the invitation. Looking very much forward for the next couple of minutes or hours.
Yeah, definitely. It's a pleasure. Great to have you. We're talking with Switzerland. Where you're based? In Switzerland, huh? Right?
Yeah, actually, so the headquarter is in Switzerland, and we have two operating hubs in Germany, and the tech hub is in Sofia. So we are, for a startup, quite diversified in terms of locations. You're right there.
Wonderful. Okay, let's start with your background, so our listeners understand the path that led you here. You spent more than 20 years in the receivable and collection industry before starting eCollect, and you saw the industry from the inside
Yes,
at a large European collection company.
yes.
Marc, how did your experience inside that traditional collection industry lead you to build eCollect in 20?
Yeah, man, it sounds scaring. I mean, 20 years in an industry is really scaring, But anyway, yeah,
No.
I spent the last 2 decades more or less in financial servicing industry. So I started my career in corporate leadership roles, working closely with private equity companies like Goldman Sachs or Advent, which are great partners, and then others like Permira, for example. And then I supported to scale one of Europe's largest debt collection company, where I then later also served as an executive board member. And after many years inside large corporations, I decided to build something myself, So I founded two companies, namely eCollect, which is a receivables management platform, and later Paster, which is a payment infrastructure company. And both focused on bringing technology into credit management and into the collection space. And we built a platform, scaled them across multiple markets, eventually exited both company to Intrum AB, which is the largest credit management company in Europe today. And during those times, I noticed something interesting. The business we're working with at my old company still had a level of digitalization when it came to payment, accounting, financial infrastructure. But at the moment an invoice became overdue, many companies still realized and acted on a very traditional and manual collection process and way. And the gap became more or less the motivation behind eCollect to build a platform, building a digital invoice to cash platform from invoicing via reminder to collection that integrates the invoicing, the dunning, and the collection part directly into the financial system of these large international modern companies. And so today with eCollect, we operate exactly that. I would call it a technology-driven platform connecting creditors, debtors, and service providers in a far more efficient, automated way, and also in a data-driven way, which becomes more and more. And with eCollect, we are now a European, not anymore a scale-up or startup, because we are more than 100 people, so let's call it scale-up. But what we are doing is, with this technology, we operate the business process outsourcing part of the business for the receivables management part for large corporations.
Yeah, I love it. I remember you said maybe this is not sexy, but I mean I love it. It's great. It's technology. Everybody needs it. Okay, one thing that stands out in your story is how you build a platform that can manage receivable across many European countries, even though each country has its own legal and operational rules.
That's right.
Marc, when you explain, you did it a little bit, when you explain eCollect to someone outside the receivable industry, how do you describe what the company actually does and will you help?
So what made this, let's call it, what made the platform technical and operational? Building a pan-European receivables management collection platform sounds very simple, as you just mentioned, to outsiders, But in reality, it was extremely complex, So every country, like you just mentioned, in Europe has its own legal framework, its own consumer protection rules, its own language, its own payment methods, currency in some cases, and even different cultural approaches how debt is communicated and resolved. If you go into the Nordics, debt is completely something different, like in south of Europe, So the challenge wasn't just from a technical perspective. The challenge was also from the regulatory perspective, but also from an operational perspective. So we had to design an overall platform that could really adapt to different jurisdictions while still giving clients one standardized API interface. And that meant more or less, building a system that understands local legal processing. Because if you talk about invoicing, dunning, and collection, you always talk about legal processing. It integrates different service providers and still delivers a consistency experience to the clients. Complexity on top of that, what we needed to think was data. Collection always involves, or not only collection, but also the invoicing part and the reminder part, and also the collection part always involves a lot of sensitive financial and personal information. So the platform also had to be fully compliant with European, but also with national regulations like GDPR, while still enabling automatization and also analytics. And I can tell you that this was causing some sleepless nights on our side. But at the end, the toughest, or let's call it the hardest part, was combining legal intelligence, operational workflow processes, and technology into one platform that can really scale across multiple markets and across multiple countries. Yes.
Yeah. And what type of client gets the most value from the platform today?
Look, we started with having clients more in an SME segment to bring these clients onto the platform, and do the debugging and stuff. And then about 3 years ago, we changed the strategy to fully focus on large international clients, because where we can really bring added value to these clients, and also where our USP lies, is that we are that we provide one API integration into such a client, and then the client can send us different invoices, different dunning cases, or at the end of the day, different collection cases for different countries. And we manage these different cases in the respective language, in the respective currency, but also with the underlying legal system in each country. So we have shifted the business model a bit from being an SME outsourcing company to really now tackle large corporations, a large organization who have different operation across European countries. And the benefit for them is not to work anymore with like 20 collection providers per country plus, or only to work with like one collection provider. And this is more or less eCollect.
Yeah, I love it. Okay. Then what differentiates eCollect compared to traditional national collection companies?
I think so when we first started, we focused mainly on the digital collection part of the business. But very quickly, we realized that there's something more important, namely by the time a claim reaches collection, most of the value has already been lost. So we then said, okay, look, there must be a smarter solution to it. So the real opportunity is earlier in the process, right? And this is something which really differentiates ourselves now from other collection companies or from other competitors. So we have built the only platform currently operating in Europe where the invoicing, the reminder, the payment communication, but also the customer interaction and the collection part of the business is on one platform. So if those steps are handled well, many cases never need to become collection at all. So the idea evolved a bit from being just a collection platform to become let's call it an invoice to cash ecosystem that's supporting companies and taking over the whole process from them the moment an invoice is issued, all the way to the final payment, or if necessary, to the legal recovery stage. So from a USP or from a strategic perspective, this approach really creates much more value for the client because they can really outsource the whole process to us, and it allows them to optimize the entire receivable lifecycle rather than only fixing problems at the very end. And this is really what stands out as of today, and what really differentiates us from other collection companies or other tech ecosystems in the market.
Great. Okay. I'm convinced.
If you want to buy something for your enterprise, okay, just give me a call afterwards.
Okay, building a fintech platform is one challenge, but doing it in a sector that involve regulation, payment, cross-border legal systems, add another layer of complexity. Mark, right now, what feels like the hardest part of running and scaling eCollect?
It's a good question, One of the biggest. So you talk about scaling the operation as of today or scaling the operation at that stage?
Yeah, no, on a day-to-day basis, the hardest part of running and scaling your business on a day-to-day basis. What is
Yeah,
the hardest part?
yeah, I think
Maybe.
Yeah, I think, one of the biggest operational advantages was how we create visibility and transparency of scaling the business also with large international clients. Okay. And so in many companies, the receivables part and also the collection part are still managed across different system teams and external providers. So this was really a challenge for us, how to convince finance only to use one tool, because normally they have the different tools. So the fragmentation makes it difficult to understand what's really happening with the company's cash flow across different markets. And this was the problem we have to challenge. So our receivables management platform really brings everything together in one place, but so that companies can track the invoice, the reminder, the payment, the dispute, the collection cases in a single system. This sounds very logical, but to really then have the CFO on the table and convince the CFO on the table that it really creates a better transparency and a much better decision-making way for the CFO. This took a while. So I think it was the challenge to go there, and then just to go to the CFO and say, okay, we want to help you grow internationally, to manage your receivables and the collection across different countries to become extremely efficient. But this step, so that we had a different ecosystem in the company also to scale such a system, this was probably the hardest challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. I'm sure. Has anything changed since the acquisition by Intrum that made scaling easier or more complex?
Look, I think naturally some things change when you do an exit, when you become part of a large organization. And I'm talking about large because Intrum is by far the largest collection company or the largest credit management company in Europe. Governance becomes more structured, processes become more formal, and decision cycles can sometimes be longer or even a pain, So, but what was very important for us and something Intrum really supported from the first day was that the entrepreneurial spirit of us, of the company remained intact. And I would say that we are still entrepreneurs within Intrum, and Intrum is providing us this environment and spectrum to really act as entrepreneurs. So the technology team, the product development, the overall vision of building like a digital receivables platform continued in the same direction with Intrum. We still focus on innovation. We still focus on automatization and building tech solutions that are very different from traditional collection companies. But what really changed in a positive way was the access to scale, because suddenly with the acquisition of Intrum, we had the ability to connect to a much larger client base, integrated with more markets and solution across different broader open network. And so in many ways, it became I would call it a combination of a startup in innovation and corporate reach, which is really actually quite powerful if it works, And the access to roughly 70,000 corporate clients, which Intrum provided, was huge to us to further scale the operation, but also to further scale the platform as itself.
Yeah, wow, it's a monster. What challenges come from balancing a startup mindset with a large corporation's like shareholders?
I think so. If I can give you the lesson from a founder perspective, okay, I think the most important lesson is that, at least what I have learned, is that selling a company is not really the end of the journey. In many ways, it's the beginning of a completely new one. And when you sell to a corporate then strategic buyer, you're not just selling technology or product. You're entering in let's call it a long-term relationship with an organization that has its own culture, process, and priorities. I think this might be different if you sell to a private equity investor or to an acquirer where then only is interested in the technology. But I think founders should really think carefully about the future alignment. And does the buyer really understand the vision of the company? Does the buyer really understand also the team and the structure? And are they willing, to support further innovation, or are they mainly interested in absorbing the technology? Because, we have seen that a lot, that companies get acquired and then technology is absorbed and the team needs to go home. So another important point is expectation from both sides. Corporates move differently than startups. Decision making is often slower, but they bring stability. They bring market access and resources that startup often struggle to build on their own. So if the cultural alignment, I would say, is the right fit, it can be incredibly powerful. And we have seen that with Intrum and eCollect. But founders should go into such transaction, with a clear understanding on that integration and collaboration after the deal. And this is almost as important as exiting the company. So these are, for me, like the key lessons I have learned. I think this is very important to understand on the corporate side, but also on the founder side.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I love it. Every company sends invoices, and every company eventually faces the problem of late payments.
Yes.
But most people outside the industry don't really see how much the sector is evolving. And from your vantage point in receivable management and collection, what shifts matter most in the industry right now, but is still underappreciated?
So you're talking about now the biggest when we talk about, so let's talk about like the traditional collection models, and then maybe move forward about, okay, how we see it and how also AI will transfer our industry, So the biggest inefficiency I've seen in our industry was the control of transparency once a collection claim left the ERP system of the client, okay? In a traditional collection model, and this is still used today, you send a case to a collection agency and then you basically wait, as a client. And reporting is slow, processes are manual, payment execution takes weeks, and everything is very country specific. So it's not really built for scale. The collection system as of today is still a very national industry. So every country treats collection and receivables management in a very individual way. It's definitely not built for digital companies that operate across different European markets. And the day sales outstanding, which needs to be reduced in every country, dashboard reporting, real-time information. This is not happening. So the industry is still designed for a very analog world, I would say, while a lot of business outside, they still are more in a digital world. And I think this is currently the challenges collection company are currently, trying to balance, Is
Yeah,
this
yeah,
So the automatization changes, the dynamic between the companies and the competitors are changing. So the traditional reminders, as I mentioned before, are often manual. And of course, this creates friction between customers and clients, between, because of escalation situation and so on. And so with a customized automatization, and now it becomes more the way we are talking today is that we are really looking to customize automatization. Communication becomes timely, structures and data driven, and the system can trigger reminders based on specific events, payment behavior, or risk profiles. So that is where our platform and some of our competitors are already today. Messages can be personalized, delivered through the channel of different channels, and customers can actually use emails and SMS and messaging, and of course fax, So we still have customers who send us fax, But anyway, I think the modern collection setup is that we can already offer different communication channels and also different payment channels to customers to increase their customer journey, but also to increase the payment behavior, And what I've seen what we have seen is that when reminders are predictable and transparent and customized, and it includes customized communication, customer actually respond in a much faster, but also in a much better way. And payments happened earlier, disputes are resolved faster, and the whole process becomes less confrontational. And therefore, the relationship between the customer and also the client gets better at the end of the day. And so with the automatization coming into such process, it makes the whole process more efficient. It actually improves payment behavior, and the overall relationship is much better at the end of the day.
yeah, that's right. I mean, if the email said, please, can you pay your bill? The relationship will be much better. No, it makes sense. I love it. You mentioned during our earlier conversation that the company is integrating AI features such as chatbots, automated email handling, obviously, and voice automation to deal with the massive volume of customer interaction in the collection industry. Looking ahead over the next 12 to 18 months, what does success realistically looks like for eCollect?
So look, I think everybody talks about AI, and I think where is AI already improving the efficiency in receivables management? And AI is already making a big difference in the operational side of receivables and collection management, especially in areas where there is a high volume of repetitive communication, So think about the typical situation in collection where thousands of emails from customers asking more or less similar types of questions. Can I pay later? I think this invoice is incorrect. How can I arrange a payment plan and all that stuff? So traditionally, this requires large teams with operating agents manually reading and responding to each of those requests. I think supports today AI can categorize these messages automatically, understands the intent and also the content, and it can generate appropriate response within seconds. So we have already deployed that in our system 2 years ago. It was at that time called machine learning. Now it's called AI, So the same applies also for voice interaction. So AI-driven voice agent can handle routine inbound and outbound conversation, provide payment infrastructure, for example, or guide customer through repayment options, So we have already built a top-notch tool within our platform with a company called Zipit AI. And this is really crazy stuff, what can be built today around calls and interactive communication. So what this really does in our industry is that it shifts human teams and really operational teams away from respective tasks, from repetitive tasks, towards more complex cases where more empathy and negotiation or also legal understanding is required. So AI does not just reduce costs, it changes the way of team works and makes the entire process faster. And it's more for responsive customers. So the interaction is there. And also what we call the gamification strategy is fully in the game. So you just touched on a couple of tools, Unfortunately, I can't give you the whole bus, but this is something we are still working on. And I think we will later on come to more AI features if you want. I can also give you a more understanding of further AI features if you want.
That's okay. If you had fewer constraints, what will you accelerate immediately?
If I have fewer constraints, you mean from
Fewer constraints meaning more money, more time. What will you accelerate first, immediately?
within the platform, you mean?
Yeah, within the company.
Okay. Yeah. So look, I cannot disclose all the tech features we are currently building, but with the support of Intrum, of course, we have a certain amount of firepower to really
That's
develop AI agents in several parts of the receivables management and also in the collection process, So the first area is communication handling. I just mentioned that email classification and chat respond and voice interaction and just simply payment negotiation is something we are currently looking into, not by ourselves, not by coding, but by AI agents. So we have already implemented a couple of AI agents in such special tech features, which can operate 24/7 and can also scale instantly in different countries, but also in different languages, because this was always a bottleneck for us to grow in terms of languages, because we needed to have operational people speaking the respective language, and to find these people is quite tough. So the second area we are evolving, let's call it this way, is that the decision making in the earlier stage of the collection process. So AI can really analyze payment behavior. It can analyze customer history and risk patterns to determine the best communication strategy, whether that's sending a reminder, an offer for a payment plan, or escalating these cases. And this really helps us to look into the previous flow before such a claim enters the collection stage. And another area we have spent quite a significant amount of money is that it will become highly, so that the area of payment orchestration will become highly automated. So think of, I mean, we do the dunning and the invoicing part. We do currently in 50 countries. The collection part of the business, we operate in 11 in Europe. And I mean, we offer 65 payment methods across different European countries, and AI can really guide debtors directly towards the easiest payment methods, dynamically adjusting options based on their behaviors, offering installment payments and so on. So the future process will be far more predictive and proactive overall, rather than reactive being a collection company. So the system which we are really investing money and building today will anticipate behavior, payment behavior, and adapt communication strategy automatically to the respective debtor, but also to the respective customer. Is
I
this
love
clear?
it. Very cool. Very cool. Then you have experienced the corporate world, build a fintech company, completed an exit, and now operate inside a large group again. That gives you a very rare perspective. Based on what you've learned so far, what should funders or operators in a similar position start doing or stop doing? Any advice?
Yeah, look, I think one thing founders underestimate is probably that fintech infrastructure is not just a technology problem. It's a so-called, I would call it, ecosystem problem. So with different type of features. So when you build a tech product like we did, you in the beginning, of course, you mainly focus on code, deployment, software, and all that stuff. Some also then go a step further to go to user experience and the distribution. But in financial infrastructure, you also have to deal with regulations, compliance, payment rails, legal framework, and often very conservative industries. That means scaling, and also, the go-to-market approach takes time. So you need, in my personal opinion, trust. You need the respective license in our case, and you need strong partnership from a shareholder perspective, from a client perspective, but also from a vendor perspective. So you also have to build a system that is extremely reliable in our case, because we are dealing with financial data and at the end of the day, real money. We collect money from customers to clients. And in most of the cases, we do that on behalf of clients, which are large international corporations. So this is very important. So the trust factor, comes in and kicks in and is super, super important. And I think another misconception which we have found is that growth will come purely from the product. I think for some of the B2C product, this is clear, but in most of the B2B product cases, purely will not come only from the product. In reality, fintech infrastructure or fintech companies, grow when technology and when the regulation and the partnerships align. And this is what I mean with ecosystem. So if one of those elements is missing, scaling becomes a pain and very difficult. The real challenge for us, but I guess also for other B2B or B2B, B2C companies, is not only building the technology, it's building the trust layer around the technology and then really scale it with clients, with vendors into different areas.
Yes, I love it. What advice will you give your younger self before starting eCollect?
Look, I think the biggest, so I was in a corporate and I was like more or less, a prisoner in the corporate. So if I would do it again, I would, the biggest challenge for me at that time was, okay, the difference in speed and decision. So I really always had this entrepreneurial spirit in myself, and I really wanted to found a company. So I made the decision to found this company. To work in an environment and where you can really make decision very quickly, So you operate with more rock and roll style. And if you see an opportunity, you go into the market and you test it and you can do it on the next day. And if you fail, you correct and move. And I think there are a few layers and a few processes, and sometimes 60% of the information is really enough to make a 100% decision, because you have the freedom and you have the flexibility also to then make the decision in another way if it's the wrong way. And I think this is something where I have seen in a startup, which is really sexy. And in a large organization where I've worked 15 years before, the decision involves always stakeholders. It's not a bad thing, it often takes longer in a more structured way and in a more thoughtful way. but it comes with a lot of change the rhythm, change the spirit. And I think people are made for corporates and people are made for startups, So the other transition is the culture and mindset of the people. Startups are built around experimentation and rapid iteration, what I really like, while the large organization are focused more on the stability and risk management and all that stuff, But I think, and this is what I've learned, and this was also something when we decided to sell to Intrum and not to another company, that when you manage both ways, the corporate way and the startup way, and you combine it in the right way, and then it becomes really powerful, and you get the innovation mindset of a startup and really, the entrepreneurial push, and you get the scale and the reachability of a large corporation. And I think this is what I would tell to my youngest Mark 20 years ago, to say, okay, get some experience in the corporate, probably not the 20 years I've been there before, or the 15, but maybe get 4 or 5 years experience in the corporate, and then combine it with the entrepreneurial approach, and then really push both barriers, And this is something I can really give as a good point to founders, to combine both of these worlds with each other, because that's really powerful at the end of the day.
Yeah, very, very wise. I love it. I love it. Mark, thank you so much for joining. Great insight into your journey, the evolution of eCollect, and how technology is transforming receivable management across Europe. Thank you so much for taking the time.
It was a pleasure. Thanks a lot. And if some of you guys have problems with collection claims, give me a call, okay? All the
No,
best.
exactly. Where do people can reach you or look at your work?
Yeah,
Where
look,
can they find you?
I'm on LinkedIn, so the name is Marc Schillinger. Just drop me a post on LinkedIn, and then I will come back to you with a competitive offer.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And that's it for today's episode of AI Interconnect. And if you enjoyed it, share it with someone who's building the future, or better yet, someone who should be. And until next time, stay curious, stay creative, and keep building. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Bye
Take
bye.
care. All the best. Bye bye.